Hello, my name is Laura Akins, and I'm the reviews editor for the Christian Chronicle newspaper. If you flip all the way back to the back section of the newspaper, that's where you'll find me. I read books, I review them, and today I'm going to try something new. I'm talking with mother and son duo Beverly Ross and Josh Ross. They authored Scarred Hope, A Mother and Son Learn to Carry Grief and Live with Joy, and it was just released in September. So I'm really excited to talk to them today. Welcome, Beverly and Josh. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
I'm so glad to have y'all. So will you tell anyone who's watching just a little bit about yourselves?
Sure. I'm Beverly Ross. I'm the founder and executive director of Wise County Christian Counseling. We also, the book was written after Jenny died, and we also have a grief center called Jenny's Hope, named after Jenny. We've lived in Decatur for 15 years, and my husband's the preacher at the Church of Christ here, and very, very honored, humbled to have been asked to write this book with my son. I was asked by my son and wrote it with my son. So thank you so much for having us on today.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here.
Thank you.
And Laura, thank you so much for having us on. I'm a huge fan of the Christian Chronicles. It's an honor to be on here with you. My name is Josh Ross. I'm married to Casey. We have two boys, 13 and 11. We're trying to figure out this whole virtual school thing right now. So doing our best to make it work. Lived in Texas the first 27 years of our lives, went to ACU. And then about 12 years ago, just over 12 years ago, we relocated to Memphis, where I'm the lead minister, the preacher at the Sycamore View Church here in Memphis. So this is where we raise our family. It's where we're going about life. This is the fourth book I've written. Two of them I co-wrote with either a best friend and now my mom. And this has been about a 2-year journey to get this book out. So we're super excited about the message and it can encourage a lot of people.
Yeah. So I just read it. I should hold it up. Scarred Hope. There's kind of a glare. I just read it. It took me, I think, 2.5 days, and it's all bent and worn and loved. So who is this book for, and why did you write it? And is it a follow-up to Scarred Faith that you wrote in 2013?
That's good. Hey, did you make it through the first 3 chapters without having at least a lump in your throat?
I wrote chapter 2. I was just boo-hooing. So it's such a good story. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, it's raw and just fantastic. Yeah. Really proud of my mom those first few chapters. This book, it's for a lot of people. I mean, we wrote this book with a few different folks in mind. I mean, one was we wanted to provide a message to grievers, and that's not just people who've lost people through death, but there are a lot of different reasons we grieve, to help give them some theology and some encouragement that just we are called to a life of perseverance, and let's keep moving together, because all of us are on some kind of grief journey. And we also wrote this for people, and this is really for all of us. Like, how can you come alongside of others to be a support system and an encouragement to them when they're on their grief journey? Because for all of us, it's not a matter of if we are going to grieve, or if we are going to suffer, or if we're going to endure pain, or if we're going to come alongside of others. It's when we do, here's a book that can help equip us to be faithful friends.
Yeah, for sure. And you said in the book, prepare in the light for what you will do when darkness comes. And this just struck me. I highlighted it over and over. This is something I have not thought much about. A lot of people make plans for fires, tornadoes. They have storm shelters up here in Oklahoma, extra supplies. But can we spiritually plan for a loss? And if so, how?
You know, I think that's a great question and a beautiful concept, and one that doesn't have a period at the end. I think it's moving how we prepare. One is to know what you believe is truth. And I think the pandemic has given us a great opportunity to narrow down, get really centered in a midst of unknowns, what we believe is truth. And one piece that we write about in the book, pretty heavy, that I was so grateful for in the midst of my own grief story, is that I had scriptures graffitied on my heart. I've been on the phone already this morning with someone in intense grief, and we're both exploring how when the grief is new and anxiety is so intense, you cannot. So to have scripture already there that you can pull up a phrase, you can remind yourself, an anchor to hold on to in truth. I think preparation, who are you going to call? Cherish, have relationships. You know who you're going to call. You know who will walk beside you. You have somebody you can be vulnerable with and say, need a little help today.
And Laura, I think it's important. And anytime I have a chance right now to speak to teenagers or college students, I try to speak this message that storms in life are going to come, and you've got to start building a foundation now. I say this in the book. We talk about a few storms, and we use that analogy, that metaphor, a few different times. It's funny. Last week, we went on a family vacation to Florida, and I was almost right in the middle of a Category 2 hurricane, Hurricane Sally. Totally messed up my 40th birthday and our week of vacation. We're on the 16th floor of a condo, and it was like I'm in the middle of it, and I hated every minute, but it was nice to know that they weren't trying to build this condo while we were there. It was built, it was sturdy, there was a foundation, it was strong. It has endured storms before, and because it has, we knew it could make it through this storm too. And I think it's the same for our lives. Like, how are you building now for when you are pressed in the future, you're ready for it?
Yeah. And that leads me to, there's 3 parts of your book. So it starts with your story and the griefs you've been through. And then in the middle, kind of tips and advice, would you say? And then at the end, it's a conversation between you two, which I absolutely loved. So I loved watching the two of you banter, and you have such a good relationship. How do I also have 13, 11, and a 7 and a 5-year-old. How do I and other people raise their children who are so strong in their faith that when we do experience a significant loss, we don't walk away from God?
How do we ask that question again? I'm sorry, something glitched.
It's okay. How do I raise my children to be so strong in their faith that when they do experience a significant loss, they won't walk away from God? Like, how did you raise your children and they've lost their sister and they're still with God?
Oh, that's such a great question. Of course, I think a lot of it is prayer. Praying for wisdom inside of me to do that. I also believe it is revealing my own vulnerability and saying, this is really hard. I really, really, really believe in teaching our children how to think and not just what to do. And so asking questions and giving our children permission in our home to wrestle with their faith, not just saying, oh no, in this house, we believe in God. But it's, tell me more about that. I want to know what you're experiencing. I believe it is constantly growing in ourselves spiritually that we're able to reveal some components to our children of grace, of mercy, of forgiveness, of hope. And we're using the language ourselves. Now, my children were already adult when Jenny died. And at that point, I think we all get curious about what's going on inside of each other. We give ourselves permission to grieve differently, to hold space together, allow our children to wrestle and walk alongside of us as we wrestle in front of them. Josh may be able to answer that from a different perspective as far as what it was like in him growing. That would be, for me, just getting curious and showing up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I didn't get this from my parents, but I think the church culture I was in growing up, I felt like I had healthy theology coming from my dad, who was the preacher growing up. But kind of just the church culture we were in, at least for me, and maybe it was just my interpretation of it, is that there were like 50 things I needed to believe and do to stay faithful to Jesus. And the older I have, the longer I have lived and the more experiences I have, that number has shrunk to maybe just a handful of things. But those things I anchor in have intensified and have grown. And this is what I continue to stand by, just as my solid foundation. So, with a 13 and 11-year-old who they were, 3 and 1 when my sister died, but just the last few years, having my mom go through a battle with cancer in 2018 and now battling cancer again just over the last few weeks. A father-in-law who's been ill, was in the hospital with some heart issues this past week. We have these conversations with our kids right now of here are a few things that we want to anchor ourselves in no matter what. That God creates, God still creates, God redeems, resurrection's going to win, hope is the best news for the world. And these provide us strong anchors.
Yeah. And real quick, I forgot to say, so this book is mostly about, so Beverly, you have Josh, Jonathan, and a daughter, Jenny, who passed away 10 years ago. So you share a lot of her story. And you also mention your cancer diagnosis, but your second diagnosis isn't in the book because this was all written before. So you're back in treatment now? What's going on now?
Well, I just had surgery a week ago. It's so weird. I found the cancer. I didn't know it was cancer, but I found another lot within 5 minutes of the book going live on Amazon.
Wow.
That was really hard, and a lot of confusion with that around the timing of that. But I'll start radiation as soon as I heal from the surgery. Great prognosis. Yeah. And then it was so interesting. We did a podcast a couple of weeks ago when I was still in the unknowns. All I knew is I had cancer, but I didn't know what kind or anything.
Okay.
And the woman doing the podcast started reading my own quotes from the book about trust. The tears were welling up in me as she's reading my own words back to me. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yes, Lord, I trust you. And so that's why I said there's not periods at the end. Our faith is moving. Where I wrote this, I put periods at the end of the book. In fact, my editor had to take out so many exclamation marks in the book. Now being reminded again, hey, cling to me. Cling to me. Not just that you're going to get the diagnosis you want, but even if you don't, hang on. I'm going to use this story. God is going to use our stories for his glory, even when we don't get our way. In the book, we call it a no matter what kind of faith.
Josh, you're back. We lost you for a second.
Sorry.
The unknowns of technology. So I haven't experienced a huge loss like you have, or even a big cancer diagnosis in my family. What doesn't mean that I won't eventually. But what does it feel like? You mentioned the analogy of grief is like bricks in your pocket. Can you explain that to someone who has no idea what it feels like or is walking with someone through grief? What does grief feel like?
I can describe what the bricks analogy was, and then I do want to address that. I believe everybody has brokenness, has stories. Mm-hmm. Brokenness looks different. And even if we haven't experienced like what we would call a big loss, I do not believe in comparative suffering. I think we show up beside each other. The analogy of the brick in your pocket came from a Nicole Kidman movie called The Rabbit.
Okay.
And so she's a little baby, her 4-year-old little boy died. He was hit by a teenage driver. And she's talking to her mom, who'd also had loss. It's a dark scene. And she asked her mom, does it ever get easier? And the screen just goes quiet. And mom says, I don't know if it gets easier, but you learn to carry the pain. She said, it's like somebody sews a brick in your pocket. And one day you'll wake up and the brick isn't your first thought. But then you bump into the cabinet and you're like, oh, yeah, the brick. Or you go to put your hand in your pocket to get something out of your pocket and you're like, oh, yeah, the brick. if I were going to give advice, and obviously I am, to someone in your spot to answer your question, I think what grievers need is someone who will just get curious and say, tell me more about that. I want to know. We don't want flippant answers. And frequently pastors, preachers, ministers who haven't experienced a kind of grief, or maybe even if they have, they use what in the book we refer to as just religious cliches. And they are not helpful. And they do not give us room to explore. They tell us to be quiet. And that means people walk away from faith. I want to know, tell me more about that. I want to know, what are you feeling? What would you ask? What's your confusion? And just share space as we walk together. We're not going to walk away, but we're revealing to other people the faithfulness of God by just saying, what do you need? What does it look like?
Do you want to add to that, Josh? She answered that pretty well.
She did. I'm so sorry. I got kicked off. I think we just have too many devices in our house of virtual school. So I came in. She was telling the Nicole Kidman story.
Oh, yes. Sorry. I was just asking her to explain what grief feels like. But along with that, you said in the book, what do we do with the groans of people? And so many people are suffering right now because of the pandemic. We've lost jobs and stability and comfort and health, marriages. And I feel like a lot of people are nervous to share in someone's grief. And you said we don't want to be flippant. I had COVID for the whole month of July, and I felt like there was a point where people wanted me to stop talking about it. Why? Like, how do we share in someone's grief and not ignore their pain?
Laura, I'm a 7 on the Enneagram. So anybody knows much about the Enneagram, I'm a 7, and which means I'm always up for an adventure. I don't have to create the party, but I need to be at the party.
Yeah.
One thing about 7s is we sweep pain under the rug the best we can. And we're really quick to make jokes or to do something. Like, we just can't sit in pain. So as a healthy 7, or a person who wants to be a healthy 7, I have to learn how to have language of pain. And I think part of this, Laura, is having people who model this well for us, especially in our local churches, having language that we don't run from, not feeling like the call of the church or the call of Christians is that we always have to have a smile on our face and, always just portraying that if you're a Christian, you're happy all the time. And this is what it means to be a mature Christian, but that we actually have language and songs and space where people can express their pain, their fears, their hurt, their sickness, and that we're okay with that. We don't feel like we have to rush through it. Because for you, I mean, you couldn't just rush through your illness in July. It was part of you, and you needed people to come alongside to say, hey, this is going to be a while, and we want to be here for whatever raw emotions need to come from you. And this is a journey. This is a marathon.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned the 4 areas to take care of: physical, emotional, relational, spiritual. So how can we take care of ourselves during grief? Maybe the physical. And you said too, a crisis lasts 6 weeks, and after that it's chronic stress. And here we are 6 months into the pandemic. So how can we take care of ourselves right now?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think we've all got to get serious about self-care at this point. Physical is the one I usually start with, and it's so basic. I think the most basic is our breath. Deep breathing reminds your body. This doesn't even sound well for a griever, but it reminds your body that you're okay. Shortness of breath that only gets in the top of our lungs, which is what anxiety produces, tells our body that we are in a fight for life. But getting that deep breath restores ability to think, restores grounding. I even breathing, deep breathing was such a spiritual routine for me early in grief. And let me tell you, I've used it like crazy in the last month with the inability of another cancer diagnosis. Just getting deep breath, reminding my body, you're okay right this minute. You're okay. Center up. We used to believe in the counseling world that people who were depressed couldn't sleep. We know that is true, but now we also believe the opposite is true, that people who don't sleep can become depressed. And so it's really important that we nurture our bodies. We give them, and I go through great length in the book, giving all kinds of tips to help us sleep, that we get really set on helping ourselves, getting curious about what we're experiencing. Mad is not the only emotion or a primary emotion. But Laura, with you, I also want to address through the COVID and wondering, where are people? And I work with people in grief, whether it's from divorce or death or a diagnosis of their own or someone else's diagnosis, if they're a caretaker, that say, my friends are gone. They're tired of me talking about it. Now, join a support group. Find a new set of friends. It doesn't take many, but sometimes our current friends can't handle what we're going through. That doesn't mean they don't love us. It doesn't mean they don't care about us. We just need somebody else in our corner. And so it's keep reaching out. Keep your eyes open. Who's looking at you? Who's saying, I can hear you? My own story, and I talk about this at length in the book. As a counselor, and maybe I was already this before I became a counselor, but I'm a reader of eyes. And I knew that my own presence brought up so much fear for people. People were scared of me. People were scared of my story. Mothers with children did not want to talk to me because I was a reminder of what could happen for them. And so there were a few friends, though, that were brave and walked beside me. Last month, there's been a resurgence. It's not even a month, but the last few weeks, there's been a resurgence of friends gather around me and say, I will walk with you. I will be with you while we're in this journey again. We're going to figure this out. They've met my physical needs, but the S is spiritual, and that we find someone who will send verses. I look up every verse that is ever sent to me, and I write them on index cards. I went back through that 3 weeks ago, writing verses on index cards. And, the one for me that this time is out of 2 Corinthians. It's out of the Message. And it says, outwardly, my body's wasting away, but inwardly, I'm being given new life. So even if, when I didn't know what kind of cancer I had, the Lord's still doing a new work in my gut, in my soul, in my heart. And to know my body may be struggling here, new life is happening. And that's our spiritual. In fact, this woman on the phone, I was already going, just don't read the whole book. Just go read chapter 7 first. Read chapter 7 first. This woman has just had 2 major deaths in her life. And she's like, I can't make it through 1 and 2. And I'm like, just skip it and do 7. All you function, all you're thinking about today is your breath. It's just your breath.
And that really resonates with me because I couldn't breathe for most of July. And I've been on an inhaler, which I'm a runner and I'm healthy. And so this has been a shock to me. And I have never focused so much on my breathing as I have in this month. And it is so grounding. So yes, that's a great, it helped me get my breathing back, but I felt like it took away my stress. And anyway, your book was so refreshing to me. It has reignited in me my faith, and I think it's a good read for anybody who is going through grief, but also who doesn't know how to help somebody, which I don't feel like I have had the right tools to help people. And I'm a preacher's wife, and I feel like I should have those. So this was just a really good book for me and gave me some tips and advice. And I will recommend it to others who are walking alongside people. And we were talking about all that going on. Does time heal? Are you still struggling? She died in 2010. Do you still struggle? Will it ever go away? What does that look like? Either of you.
Josh, you want to go with that one?
Well, yeah, and I think I'll basically set you up, because this was I mean, we want time to heal. We want to heal, and sometimes we want to heal quickly. And so that's section 3 of our book, when we wrestle with 10 questions or 10 statements we use when people are going through forms of pain. This is the first one. Does time heal? And my mom has been the one who's probably educated me and has helped equip me with this one more than anything, because her response is, no, it doesn't. But then she reframes it, that time done well heals. So, Mom, you may speak into that just for a moment.
I don't believe, I mean, we've all known people that have had a hard story, whether it be divorce, death, bankruptcy, job loss. When we just sit with time, not with any intentionality to it, it just makes us bitter. It didn't heal anything. It just made bitter. And so that's where the physical, emotional, relational, spiritual, time done with intention, making sure, I think direction is everything. And so making sure our eyes, the eyes of our heart are pointed in the direction we want to end up. Now, that's what I said early on, is time done well heals. Now, 10 years out, oh, I can make this make sense. I don't even know that I want to be healed anymore, because it implies that grief is a sickness. Grief is from the Lord. It's not a sickness. And after a while, our love, you're not going to grieve anything that you don't love. And I don't want to walk away from my grief with Jenny. Now, I want to be clear with that. I don't want every time I think about Jenny for grief to come up more than the joy that I had her, more than the joy of her life. And so I think that's really important, that we get really intentional and we're not just spending time, okay, time heals, time heals. No.
Yeah.
Get intentional. You got to figure out what does that look like. If you are listening to this, though, and you are in early pain, I do want to say clearly, it will get better. It will not stay this raw forever. You will get a breath. You will have a day. It's not your first thought. You will have a day that you smile and that you go, I think I just heard me laugh. You will have days that begins to happen. It doesn't stay that raw, gushing ache forever.
Yeah, and you say in the book, grief and joy can hold hands. So can you explain that just a little bit more?
Absolutely. And I do believe that. I believe that totally. Josh's wife asked me months into Jenny's death, and I don't know if she remembers asking me this question. I will never forget answering this question. She said, got a question for you. Are you going to be bitter? And I thought for just a moment and responded with declaration, I will not. My thought is, I have no idea how I'm not, but I'm not going to end in bitterness here. Where my head went is there still going to be dancing in this kitchen? Is Christmas still going to be fun? Or am I going to continue to enjoy my grandchildren? Am I going to continue to laugh with them and have bedtime stories with them? What's it going to be like? And so on Jenny's first birthday after her death, I wrote this in my journal. I do not ever want the pain of her death to overwhelm the joy of her birth. And so I decided then that I wanted grief and joy to hold hands. Now, when I first wrote that quote, I said I wanted joy and grief to hold hands. When I had someone do it for me in my waiting room, as soon as I opened my door to bring a client back, it's on my wall. So I see it multiple times every day, but I switched grief and joy so that my joy can have a capital J. My joy is in Jesus. My joy is supernatural. It is through his spirit that I'm able to breathe in joy. And I'm able to have a grounding in my heart of joy. Someone asked me, because I do teach that it is impossible for the human brain to hold two opposing emotions at the same time. And this pastor said, aren't those opposing emotions grief and joy? I said, they are not. Grief and joy are both rooted in love. Grief is from love. Joy is from love. And when the root is the same, they aren't opposing. So because grief opened up a deeper place in my heart, I have deeper joy. It doesn't even roll off my tongue very well, but it is true. I have joy in deeper places of my heart now than I did before, because I live in a deeper place.
And joy is not the absence of pain, and joy is it's not the destination. It's with you on the entire journey.
Yeah. Man. So Josh, what do you know now about God from having lost a sister? Did you learn anything? Do you know him in a different way now?
Yeah. I think what energized me the most after Jenny's death, and it's still energizing me now a decade later, is that the power of the resurrection of Jesus has the ability to give us passion to live every single day with greater intensity and purpose. And if you would have asked me right when Jenny died, I would not have thought that to be true. It just felt like darkness was going to be with me forever. But the hope of the resurrection doesn't just transform the fact that it doesn't just give us hope that we will see our loved ones again one day. It gives us, if this is true, how is this happening everywhere I go today? So it's totally transformed, and it's energized how my wife and I engage the neighborhood where we live, the city where we live, how we go about doing ministry, raising our children in the midst of a lot of diversity. And I would not have thought a death that hurt could have given us a lens to see the world differently like it has.
Yeah. And you talk in the book about, let me see, things, do things happen for a reason? Do you think she had to die for the grief center to come? Do you think that's the way things work, or what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so we wrote a whole chapter on that statement right there, Laura.
Yeah.
Because you hear this a lot, especially in church. You know, everything happens for a reason, and people need that to give comfort. My mom and I do not believe that to be true. And hopefully we talk about it in the book in a way where if other people want to continue to use the phrase, we're not saying they're heretics or they don't love God. We just don't think it's helpful. Because I cannot speak that phrase to someone who has been sexually abused, to someone who has lost a 16-year-old in a car accident because they were hit by a drunk driver. I think we serve a God who's more creative than having to have a 31-year-old mother die so that God could have a grief center. God could have a grief center no matter what. So I think the way we talk about it is Jenny didn't die so that there could be a grief center in Wise County, but because Jenny died and because we serve a God who is at work in our brokenness to redeem all things, Wise County now has a grief center. Does that sound differently?
Yeah. Yes. And I think people throw that around, and that's kind of, you led into things we shouldn't say to someone grieving. What were some other phrases? Because I probably have said these and learned a lot from y'all. What are some things we shouldn't say to someone who's like early days, some of the things that were said to y'all?
And we make fun of ourselves in the book because we have said a lot of these things too. Everything happens for a reason. Heaven needs another angel. Mom, can you think of a couple of others?
Oh, I think I pray that these aren't loud in my mind just right now. You know, when we blame God for it, our language blames God. And I think that phrase is God, everything happens for a reason. I think that's hard for my 9-year-old granddaughter. But now she's 20. But at the time it was hard, and I didn't want her to hear that God wanted her to grow up without a mom.
Yeah. So what are some better practices we can do? I think y'all mentioned sit in silence. I get afraid when people cry. What should we do?
Yeah. And Laura, I love that you're bringing this up, because we tried to be really careful in that last section of the book that we don't want to strike people with so much fear of saying the wrong thing that they don't say anything. So part of it is we've got to give each other a lot of grace. But as you come alongside of others, weigh your words and your phrases carefully. Come alongside of others, be present. And when you speak, just weigh your words, because sometimes what we mean for good can really sting and pour salt in wounds. So speak, discern with the Spirit what it is we need to say, but weigh our words very carefully.
Yeah, and y'all said in the book, don't anticipate what others feel. You could say, my heart is joined with yours as we journey together. And that really struck with me. I made a note for that. I would love for y'all to share one of your favorite memories of Jenny. Do y'all have one on the top of your head? We've talked a lot about her.
Yeah, I have so many. And that I love that you're asking that, because I don't want her death to be the most important thing about her. I want her life to be. Jenny was fierce for her family. We tell some stories about that in the book. A funny story that Josh even shared in Scarred Faith. I wanted to share it again in Scarred Hope because I thought it was so beautiful of her, so funny. She was fierce, loyal, helpful. If I needed anything, Jenny would be there to help me unpack. I guess right now, with us just going through a hurricane, I remember when Katrina came through New Orleans. Jenny did not have a lot of money, but she knew some people who did, and basically hosted a fundraiser to raise money. And then Jenny began to find refugees from New Orleans that were staying in hotels in her area, Fort Worth, Dallas. Take them food, take them diapers, take them clothes. She met them at their room with their needs and helped organize a task force to take care of people until they could return home. Some of those people never returned home. She had a deep passion to help others. Another one of my favorite stories, and I tell this in the book, her very best friend that had a brain tumor. And Jenny did not meet Jesse till after her brain tumor. So she did not know Jesse apart from depression and anxiety that resulted from the tumor. Jesse tells the story of being in a worship time with Jenny, head down, bowed, just feeling terrible. And she said Jenny stood up and with one swoop with her hand, grabbed Jesse, lifted her hand in praise, would not let her sit down, and stood with her while they were singing praises to the Lord. And Jesse said it was definitely a turning point for her in depression and anxiety. Have a friend like Moses' friends did for him. Her eyes, the eyes of her heart, began to see a victory as her friends stood with her and lifted her hand. So Jenny was a servant heart, a worshiper, such a servant heart and a worshiper, and had a deep faith because of her own pain with secondary infertility.
And she was already practicing what you're teaching. She was walking alongside her friend and helping her friend through that. Josh, was she a nice big sister? What was your relationship?
She was a very protective big sister. Jenny and I always had a close relationship. I mean, she has she has had a prophetic voice in my life when I needed it. She was always a dear friend. We had many conversations just driving down the road and just processing pretty much everything in life. Great conversation partner and a deep faith, always an encourager. There's so many stories I could tell, Laura. I love the question because it just brings a smile to both of our faces to even right now be processing all the memories of her laughter, her empathy.
Yeah. Well, I love seeing your family dynamic and relationship. That's something I'm striving for with my young children. I hope that we'll be as close as y'all are. Do y'all have any last thoughts about your book? Anything else you want to share about it? Anything else you want to add before we're finished?
I would say, I mean, the first book I wrote in 2013 was Scarred Faith. So in a way, this was a part two. But the day I asked my mom to write this book, it was the day after her cancer diagnosis in 2018. And a lot of this was me just wanting to come alongside of my mom. Not that she couldn't do this by herself, but to say, Mom, look, there is a book inside of you through your life experiences. I want to help get this book out. So let's do this kind of in the same frame as a scarred faith. And let's talk about scars and wounds and use this as a foundation to get this story out. So it has been almost a 2-year journey that has been so fun to partner with her. It's been hard. It's been difficult. But such a joy to see the fruit coming from this.
Okay, were you going to say something, Beverly?
I was just going to say, I'm so honored. It was a very humbling experience, and Josh was an excellent coach for me. I hadn't done writing since I was in high school, college. I loved to write then, but I hadn't. I'm a speaker. I'm a talker. And so to have a cheerleader who does both. Josh is an excellent speaker and an excellent writer. And for him to guide me and teach me how to do that. His advice constantly, it didn't take me just once. I'm a slow learner, but it was, Mom, you can't write. You are used to speaking for the ear. Now we've got to learn for you to speak for the eye. And that was huge for me to learn. And his other was, Mom, you can't use that many exclamation marks.
It's true. You can't. So I'm a writer and I do not enjoy being in front of people. So this is me going out on a limb today. But I have one last question for y'all. So everything's online. We probably do a lot of Zooms nowadays. We want to know, are you wearing real pants on the bottom half or sweatpants, pajama pants? Will you share?
I'm actually wearing a t-shirt in support of a friend who's having surgery today for cancer. So that I got a t-shirt on. I have athletic shorts because I'm about to go straight into a Friday workout after this.
Okay. At least you have a reason, right?
Right.
I am 63 years old and we fully dress for everything.
Yeah. Yes. It's a good practice.
I'm about to go speak for a group of teachers that are worn out after their 7th week of school. So I'm going to go and cheerlead them. So I just went ahead. I'm fully dressed and ready to pull out the drop.
Yes. I guess maybe that was a little unfair. Maybe a few months ago, we would have been a little more relaxed on the bottom half. Nowadays, I guess we're kind of re-entering and going out in public more often. I will admit, I have on a skirt and I just realized I still have my pajama pants underneath my skirt. So I'm right there with you, Josh. So just putting myself out there. So I just want to thank y'all for coming on today and spending time with me and sharing your story and being so vulnerable. This book, Scarred Hope, is out now and it's a really good read. If you're walking through grief, it's very comforting. If you're not, it will give you skills and tools to walk with other people. And I will write up kind of a summary of your book and it'll be in the next issue of the Chronicle. So check us out there at christianchronicle.org. Yeah, just thank you for coming. It was just a pleasure to meet y'all and talk to y'all. And I consider y'all friends now. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.